Welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, June 29th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's one big, beautiful bill as the Senate comes to a vote-a-rama this weekend and likely to vote tomorrow on this bill for passage as we go into the July 4th deadline, July 4th being this Friday. Donald Trump has set a deadline for the House of Representatives and the United States Senate saying that they must pass this bill in time for me to sign it on the 4th of July. A huge number of news coming out of the Senate today. I made a video earlier on talking about the retirement from Senator Thom Tillis, but I wanted to also talk about that in tandem with everything that we've been seeing come out about the one big beautiful bill, what it means not only just for electoral politics, which is going to be a big focus, very obviously, of this video, but also what it means, just generally speaking, for the United States Senate, what it means for America, what it means, and what we are starting to see come out of this bill. Now, CBS did a good, real rundown of some of the most major parts of this bill here, ranging from Medicaid restrictions to SALT deduction to the debt ceiling, child tax credit, et cetera, et cetera. They go through all of these things, and it honestly is quite good. And to go through it briefly, just so you understand the stakes and the severity of many of the things that are set to pass if the Senate version makes it through and signed into law, you're starting that these tax cuts from 2017, the ones that were cited very often by Donald Trump and his administration, they're looking to make permanent. They're looking to do a permanent extension on some of these tax cuts, and they're looking to make it so it would require another change going through the standard procedure in the House, in the Senate, and signed by the president. And it would be something that would be a challenge and a difficulty for many Democrats that would likely follow suit in the eventual time the Democrats do reclaim the presidency. But some of the other bigger things here is that on Medicaid restrictions, misspoke there, is that they're going to be really targeting a number of Americans that are on Medicaid right now. It looks like they're looking to do frequent eligibility checks, work requirements for some adults to get them off. And you're also seeing, too, that overall, a lot of these cuts here, they're trying to do, to some degree, an allocation of $25 billion for rural hospitals, in a way trying to offset some of the cuts that are going to Medicaid. But the point is that the GOP is trying to cut substantive portions of Medicaid and is just trying to offset it for portions of America's constituency that they seemingly want to cover. But again, huge cuts coming here to Medicaid, something that many Democrats and honestly a lot of Republicans have been very outspoken about, but chances are this will make it into the final set of the bill and won't change between now and the time it reaches Donald Trump's desk. They're also just looking, again, restrictions on food stamps. They're looking to change some of the fundings, some of the funding requirements. They're also looking to raise the age for work requirements. So currently it's at 54. They're looking to make it to 64. So what that essentially means is that they're going to be sectioning up a huge chunk of the country that is currently on food stamps. Again, massive changes, ones that are coming directly through this bill and ones that will impact millions of Americans nationwide. That's something that many people are looking at as a negative for the Republican Party. And again, we have to keep going through this. There's a lot to really understand. An AI moratorium, that's one that I don't think we've talked about really at all, and I haven't really seen many people in the news talk about it either, but it looks like they're trying to do a 10-year moratorium on state regulations on artificial intelligence, which is really crazy to think about. That means that for 10 years, no states can do any type of laws surrounding can you do AI to do deepfakes for election ads, right? That's something that a state could not regulate if this bill passes. Can you do, whatever it might be? I don't want to say these things, so I don't want to get a restricted, video on it, but you can imagine what some people can do with AI. Can you use it for robocalls? Well, if a state can't regulate AI use, can't regulate at least the fact that you are able to create those things. Obviously, they can regulate scamming and going after vulnerable portions of the population financially, absolutely. But they can't say, you can't create this. You can't upload photos and do this, right? So these are things that will have a very, very big impact and something that I do not think we're talking about at all. But again, is making its way into this one big, beautiful bill. So there's a lot here, a lot more that we haven't talked about, a lot more that will come through as the House and Senate do revisions. But the point is that this current version of the bill holds a lot of weight. This is Donald Trump's primary piece of legislation that he will likely cite and leave as his legacy. This is what the White House wants. They know that the Republicans are probably going to lose the House next election cycle, and they know that it's early on enough that many Republicans in vulnerable districts and vulnerable states can sign on to this bill under the idea that Americans will forget between now and the midterms of 2026, but that will likely not be the case. Voters are already souring on the One Big Beautiful Bill. This is a poll from Fox News where they asked voters, based on what you know about the budget proposal. In the previous question, they referenced the budget proposal being the One Big Beautiful Bill. Would you say you favor or oppose it? Just 3% of respondents say they don't know. They don't have an opinion. But 59% oppose this bill. And the main reason for that is because Medicaid cuts don't just impact Democrats, right? That's a very obvious thing. Changes to SNAP and food stamps don't just negatively impact Democrats. Even if you voted for Donald Trump, and in many cases, it is the states. It are the states that, I guess I'm not speaking correctly here, but it is the same states, many of them, that voted for Donald Trump, in some cases overwhelmingly, that will be disproportionately impacted by cuts to Medicaid, will be disproportionately impacted by cuts to food stamps, will be disproportionately affected if the work requirements are moved up a decade through a Senate vote months after an election. And that's why you find that huge chunks of the population, 59%, say they oppose the One Big Beautiful Bill. The thing that I thought was very interesting was that amongst 2024 Trump voters, just 73% approve of this bill. This is Donald Trump's primary piece of legislation. It reminds me a lot of, when Democrats are in the first 2 years of office. Obamacare is a good example. And they pass legislation that is very unpopular nationwide. Obamacare, even though it is popular now, and I don't think the One Big Beautiful Bill will be remembered favorably, but Obamacare is. But at the time, it was very bad for Democrats. It was very bad for Democrats. That cannot be lost on this situation. And what did that result in? Well, we can take a look. In 2008, Democrats had 257 seats in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, in 2008, Democrats had 59 seats in the House of Representatives. A Republican Senator, Arlen Specter in Pennsylvania, ended up switching parties to become a Democrat in that state. But again, it was 59-41 and at one point 60-40. And the House looked as it did. But do you know what happened as a result of the passing of Obamacare? I kid you not, one of the biggest electoral wipeouts Democrats have seen in a very long time go from 257 to 193. Just take a look at that map. Take a look at all the red. Blue to red, blue to red, blue to red. I mean, it is fascinating. The amount of electoral pickup that the GOP had just in 2 years. And it happened because, in many of these cases too, look at this. Arkansas first. Republicans didn't even run a candidate, and then the next cycle, they're winning. It's fascinating. Why? Because Democrats passed Obamacare. They passed a bill that the American public very clearly did not want them to pass. And the Democrats paid for it electorally. Now, obviously, Obamacare ended up becoming more popular, but there are many cases in which in the first 2 years of a presidency, the president often overreaches if they have that trifecta. They often pass things and steamroll things through Congress, sign the bill, and then voters say, wait a second, I don't like what you're doing here. And the Senate is doing it right now. And there will be huge electoral repercussions. You can see it here. The heavy Democratic Party losses in 2010 were attributed to anger at President Obama, opposition to the Affordable Care Act. This is true. This is very, very true. And looking at what now we are seeing with the Senate, and then looking at now what you're seeing in terms of public response already, I wouldn't want to be in this position as a member of Congress having to defend my vote, as it holds that 20% more Americans disapprove of the bill than approve. And many of these Republicans that are now, in support of passing the bill, notably too, Susan Collins, voted to advance the GOP mega bill, can still eventually say, I don't support the bill. But she did advance it. And this bill is going to be tied to her name whether she likes it or not. Because it is this advancing of the vote that even makes discussion and debate and a vote eventually that will pass the GOP. Eventually, because of her vote to advance the GOP bill. And that's where you see that Susan Collins making this decision is going to be one of the continued points where she has been loyal to the GOP, don't get me wrong, but does not represent a state that is conducive to votes like this coming from her office. And she already is one of the primary Democratic targets in 2026. When you take a look at her approval rating and the way that voters talk about her, they don't like her. She holds a 14% approval rating in the most recent survey that we saw. 14% approval. I mean, that is fascinating. That is record low. I mean, you have not seen that in a very long time for really anybody in electoral politics. That would put her in a position of being one of the most unpopular senators in the United States. And that is the reality, because Republicans don't like her in Maine. They think she's too lib. Independents don't like her because they don't like how she votes. Democrats certainly don't like her because she's a Republican. All of these things, all these metrics really spell out bad news for her. Because if you aren't inspiring your base and you're not winning independents through this, more middle of the road, you aren't winning an election. In 2020, her approval rating in the exit polls in Maine was 49%. If this data is even remotely true, that it's at 14%, or you saw one from Public Policy Polling, slightly better at 25%, she is done for in 2026. And when you make votes like this, you are doing yourself no favors electorally. But maybe she's reassessing re-election, doesn't care, but honestly speaking, I just think it's simply bad politics. And if Susan Collins seriously is as concerned as she promises she is time and time again, she would have opposed even debating on the bill, because that is how you stop things in the United States Senate. For someone who has been there as long as her, I'm sure she's no stranger to what a filibuster is and preventing any type of vote happening on a bill you simply don't want to pass. But of course, she'll say, I just wanted to have a discussion on it, but I'm going to vote no. But voters aren't going to give her that second chance. Same thing with Thom Tillis, too. I mean, he is somebody who now is choosing to retire. But I imagine that this retirement actually makes him less likely to vote for the bill, because he doesn't come from a blue state like Susan Collins does. He comes from North Carolina, which means he's beholden to a more Republican electorate and a primary that Donald Trump promised that he would endorse whichever opponent against Thom Tillis. But now it looks like Thom Tillis, not Susan Collins, might be the holding out vote that might vote against the Republican Party in a number of different ways in this one big beautiful bill, and not the Republican that is running in a Democrat plus 8 state. That is the difference here. And I think that this one big beautiful bill holds a huge electoral liability, given that the American public just simply doesn't like it. It reminds me a lot of, again, Obamacare, which inevitably became popular. And I will reiterate, I do not believe that will be the case for this one big beautiful bill. But at the time, those repercussions in that election are still being felt. 2010 was a census year. Republicans winning as well as they did in that cycle is the main reason they held electoral strength and held the House of Representatives for 8 consecutive years, because they gerrymandered the hell out of those districts, because the American public voted them in, ushered them in, because a president to the American public at the time passed a bill that was so unpopular, voters soured on the president. And Obama wasn't just narrowly elected. We know in 2008 exactly what type of presidential candidate he was, and he was one that was able to have the largest margin of victory that only pales in comparison, barely, to Bill Clinton from the 1990s. Obama was winning Indiana, a state that now Trump won by 19 percentage points. That is the extent of Obama's reach. You take a look at the election comparisons, 2008 versus 2004. Take a look at how much bluer the country got. Nevada by 15 points. North Dakota by 19 points. Indiana by 22 points. Florida by 8 points. Pennsylvania by 8 points. Michigan by 13 points. Wisconsin by 14 points. It was fascinating. The only few states that shifted to the right, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Oklahoma, West Virginia, but even then, barely. Just take a look. Crazy. Even if you look at 2012, massive improvements for Obama. So again, Democrats and Republicans can pass bills and eventually win elections again, obviously. But with this one big beautiful bill, I do not think we are in a case where voters are going to forgive many of their representatives and their senators for passing this bill. And given that there is already so much focus on many negative aspects of the bill, Democrats are already messaging on the Medicaid cuts. You're seeing Republicans come out against it. Donald Trump is saying, I want this signed by the 4th of July. The American public is saying, I don't want this signed at all. But the Republicans in Congress aren't going to listen. They're going to pass this bill, and there will be dramatic electoral repercussions. And whether they are felt in this year's November regularly scheduled elections, whether they're felt in off-cycle special elections, and whether they're felt in the midterms, the electoral repercussions will be felt. Because that's the way that American politics works. That's what happened, and Trump won. That's what happened with Biden. That's what happened with Obama, and Obama heavily. And it will happen again. And this one big, beautiful bill, I do not think will go down in history as a popular bill amongst the American public. And you're already starting to see the direct impacts of the infighting amongst the GOP because of it, electorally to the GOP because of it, and it will be something that will be remembered should Republicans lose the midterms in 2026 to the degree that they are expected to do so, as one of the turning points for Democrats, as the country begins to get, again, sour on the national GOP for 2026. We're starting to see it now in its formative area because of this one big, beautiful bill and the Republican Party's unwillingness to adjust and maneuver based on public opinion, but then again, that arguably has never really been their strongest suit. And so we'll see. The one big, beautiful bill set to pass by Friday, signed into law by Donald Trump. And it will be interesting to see exactly how the American public responds, to what degree they will, and the electoral ramifications because of it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.